This is Popping the Bubble with hosts Sandra Ponce de Leon and Pete A. Turner.
Hi, my name's Jeremy Gardner. I'm a serial entrepreneur in the blockchain space, and now I run my own hybrid venture hedge fund called Awesome Ventures, and you're listening to Popping the Bubble.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeremy. Jeremy, it is so great to be here in the Crypto Castle. I have been wondering about this place since I heard about it. So thank you for inviting us in and to speak with you, because you are so accomplished for your age, and you've done so many great things in the crypto world. You've started the Blockchain Education Network, which is all about educating people on how to get into crypto and blockchain, and you ran one of the first ICOs. Now you're doing venture capital. It's amazing. It's great to have you, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I think your founding story is really interesting. So, maybe, or not your founding story, but your journey of how you got into this space. Can you talk a little bit about how you came to know Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies?
Sure. So like many people, my first exposure to Bitcoin was through the Silk Road. I was reading an article on Rolling Stone about this black market, Amazon.com, and there was an excerpt about this strange new internet money called Bitcoin that was pseudo-anonymous. And I was much more fascinated by the Silk Road than I was by Bitcoin. And learning about Bitcoin, I was just confused and kind of dismissed it as this black market currency. And I wouldn't really return to it until late 2013, when the very first, or the largest Bitcoin price rally occurred. And the price of Bitcoin went from under $100 to almost $1,000. I got in at a couple $100s. Seeing this upward momentum and actually selling at $1,000, thinking, all right, this thing's good for buying drugs off the internet and speculation, but not much more than that. However, around that same time, I was losing the passion I had for politics, which had driven me for the past several years. I had developed my own major in college in political strategy. I had spent the summer working for the governor of Massachusetts. I spent that fall running the campaign of the woman who's now Attorney General of Massachusetts.
So you were really on the path to becoming a politician yourself.
Or some sort of political operative. Mm-hmm. But as I saw the bureaucracy that plagued and even a very efficient state government such as Massachusetts, and the role that money played in political elections in an attorney general's race at the state level, I realized that politics in my 20s was just going to be raising money and pushing paper. And given that I got into politics because growing up in a small farm town, that's how I thought you changed the world, I was quickly growing disillusioned. And so that winter, beginning in early 2014, I transferred to the University of Michigan, trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. It was clear that if all I could do was raise money for politicians, I'd be much better served making money and influencing them later, running for politics later in life. But I really had no idea how to do that. Entrepreneurship and tech were just worlds away from what I was exposed to growing up. And thus, I never really saw it as an opportunity. However, when I transferred to Michigan, I just happened to move in with a young Bitcoin entrepreneur who convinced me that Bitcoin might be a good idea beyond just speculation and buying drugs off the internet. And I humored him because I didn't have any friends and I didn't really have anything better to do. So I started learning about Bitcoin. And at his behest, I joined the University of Michigan Bitcoin Club, because apparently that was the thing. And at the very first Bitcoin Club meetup, a reporter from USA Today came and started asking us about our Bitcoin Club and Bitcoin. And I don't have much to contribute because I was so new to the technology and the organization. But partway through the interview, she mentioned that there were Bitcoin clubs at MIT and Stanford. From there, I saw this organizing activity as the political animal that I was. And I got on a call with the heads of the Michigan, MIT, and Stanford clubs that same night. They're all talking about their respective successes and failures as organizations, offering to share resources, contacts, And at the end of the call, not having offered much thus far, I suggest, why don't we create an organization out of this? And that organization would come to be known as the Blockchain Education Network. At the time, it was just this hodgepodge of Bitcoin clubs, and I thought it would be a nice little resume booster. But shortly after we incorporated the nonprofit that it would become, Mt. Gox, the world's largest Bitcoin exchange in the world at the time, imploded, taking more than 5% of Bitcoin in circulation with it. That was a bad moment for almost everyone in the industry, except for me.
Really?
And the reason for that is, one, I didn't have really any money in Bitcoin at the time. And secondly, it was because all these young people learned about Bitcoin through this news that was on every major news channel, every major news website. And so young people started learning about Bitcoin because of Mt. Gox, and they didn't really care about the decline in the price because they were broke college students. They were much more interested in the technology. And the platform that I had recently incorporated was supposed to provide the foundation for any young person that was interested in this tech, because they weren't teaching classes about it. There weren't really online courses about Bitcoin yet. And thus, we provided this great launch pad for students all over the world, and by the end of the semester, we had over 100 chapters in 20-plus countries on every habitable continent. And then through that nonprofit, I actually met a brilliant 18-year-old computer scientist that I would end up dropping out of school with and starting a software project known as Augur, which was one of the very first ICOs ever, one of the very first applications built on top of the Ethereum blockchain, and now is worth hundreds of millions of dollars
and what
in
does
market
Augur
capitalization. It's a decentralized prediction market platform, effectively an unstoppable online betting platform that predicts the future. It's a stock market for anything.
For anything.
Yes. So
you're going through a lot of things, and for a lot of folks, blockchain, Bitcoin, it's all foreign stuff. Can you just 30-second primer on what an ICO is so we can understand what that is?
Sure. So an ICO is a horrible initialism that stands for initial coin offering, similar to an IPO, an initial public offering. And what it enables project to do is bootstrap and distribute a new token on top of or supporting a blockchain. So you can do an ICO for a new blockchain or for a token issued on top of a blockchain. And typically what these tokens do, if it's for a new blockchain, such as Ethereum, Ether had one of the very first ICOs, that token is used to incentivize miners or validators in the network to confirm transactions. With Augur, the token that we issued was issued on top of the Ethereum blockchain, and that was used to help create a decentralized consensus system. You see, we created this unstoppable betting platform, but it's only unstoppable if the source of truth is not stoppable. And if you have one individual or one group of individuals or one API or company saying whether or not an event happened, that's a central point of failure. So if it's a football match or it's a political election, you don't really want to rely on one single arbitrator of events. And instead, what you have with Augur is this token that's used by thousands of people to report on the outcome of events. And they're incentivized to do that by receiving a portion of the transaction fees in the network.
When someone builds a subsequent coin off of Ethereum, does that create more value or more foundation for Ethereum then as things are built off of it?
100%. There's a thesis known as the VAT protocol thesis. And it's the notion that in the early iterations of the web, the protocol level technology was neglected and ignored because no value was captured at that level. Instead, all the value that was captured in the web 1.0 and 2.0 was at the application layer. So Google, Facebook, Uber, those companies are the applications capturing pretty much all the value that the internet creates. And thus, the protocols are consequently deeply neglected. You have a volunteer very small volunteer army across the world maintaining the core fabric of the World Wide Web, and it's not a good model for growing such an exponential technology. The roles are flipped with blockchains, which I'd consider Web 3.0, because you have these protocols such as Ethereum and Bitcoin that have these tokens at the bottom of the tech stack that grow in value as applications that also create value are built on top of them. So all the value that's created on top of the Ethereum blockchain or on top of the Bitcoin blockchain trickles down to the protocol tokens, those tokens that incentivize the validation of transactions at the base level of the protocol.
Wow. So you talked about blockchain being sort of the Web 3.0 in terms of and the value being at the protocol level. There are new protocols that are coming to play. So you've got proof of work versus proof of stake. Is it that now that there's so much investment that's gone into Ethereum, for example, as a protocol layer, are these developers continue to build on top of them? It's sort of like the Android versus iOS argument. Is there room for another operating system for mobile? What are your thoughts on that?
So right now, my thesis is, and this changes over time, of course, but my thesis is that there will be 6 to 12 core protocols in the crypto economy. Having much more than that is just unimaginable, simply due to the interoperability. It's like having multiple internets, so it would just be very difficult to do. But due to the nature of blockchain technology, and because these are distributed databases, they're inherently less scalable than the internet as it is today. And thus, you'll need a handful of them. And you'll have protocols for a digital gold, such as Bitcoin. And Bitcoin really has an ironclad grasp on that use case. Digital gold, store of value.
Right.
It's effectively lost every other component of the crypto race. That's its main use case today.
And is it going to continue, do you think?
My
Keeping that store value?
My bet would be on Bitcoin to be continue to be successful purely as a digital gold store of value coin. It's got a proven use case, unlike pretty much every other protocol out there. Then we'll see the emergence of probably one privacy coin, whether that's Zcash or Monero. Massive integration was just announced with a token called Verge, and those there will be one of those. Then we'll probably see some smart contract blockchains, multiple, including Ethereum. That's Ethereum's game to lose right now, but we could see, Tezos come up, Cardano. There's a ton. Then there will probably be a protocol for security tokens, which generally represent real-world value on the blockchain. Harbor, which was founded by David Sachs, one of the PayPal co-founders, just raised its Series B like a month after its Series A, raising $28 million today. And so there's another platform called Polymath that does the same thing. And then we'll have a couple or maybe several interoperable blockchain layers that connect all these blockchains. But there won't be much more than that. And like I said, Bitcoin and Ethereum are real front runners here. It's their game to lose, at least in the use cases that they've proven out. But they're both fairly mismanaged organizations at the nonprofit level that oversees development, or Bitcoin doesn't even have a nonprofit behind it.
Because they're decentralized?
Yeah, almost too decentralized. But even Ethereum has shown that the Ethereum Foundation is not a very reliable entity. They have a ton of money, but really have not been able to iterate nearly fast enough. And thus, it's a free-for-all right now, and that's why we see so many new protocols. If someone is able to get market adoption, get developer adoption, in theory, you could really see the emergence of a brand new protocol as a dominant kind of chain in crypto. It's anybody's game right now.
Right. And isn't the driving factor for that just the slowness in terms of the transaction speed or velocity with Ethereum?
It's a matter of trade-offs. Bitcoin and Ethereum sacrifice speed and scalability for security. Some blockchains have chosen to be less censorship resistant and more fast and efficient. But it's trade-offs. There's nobody, despite a lot of the false advertising out here, that actually tackles the problem of scalability, speed, efficiency, and security better than, say, Bitcoin or Ethereum. They each do something differently.
Yeah.
When you compare those things and the risk with, we don't know what those 6 things, and maybe it will be 10 because there's things we can't see. When you compare that against the known, like the dollar, all the euro, all these other things, why would somebody bet on something that is so unknown? I mean, the change is coming. Great. Let somebody else fund the growth and the risk, and I'll get in a couple of years from now.
Well, that's what has always happened. The VCs, the investment bankers, the private equity folks, they always get in early, and then they see all the upside, and consumers are left with an overpriced IPO and have no... they have upside. If you had invested in Netflix or Amazon or Apple way back when, or even Google, you would have done quite well. But imagine if you had been able to buy a little piece of Facebook equity right when you joined the website. For me, $1,000 would have turned into millions.
Sure.
So that's what this technology provides, is the opportunity for anyone to gain exposure to the growth of new technology. It's not just a bunch of old white dudes on Sand Hill Road. This is the democratization of finance and investing in early stage ideas. A lot of money will be lost, but a lot of money will be made at the same time. For folks that are risk adverse, they shouldn't invest too much, but I'd suggest anyone that has an investment portfolio should put at least 5% of their portfolio into crypto. And the reason for that is because crypto is an uncorrelated asset class. So while it's highly risky, a 5% investment, if it goes to zero, isn't the end of your portfolio. But in the case that it continues to go up as it has over the past near decade, then the potential upside of that 5% investment mitigates the overall risk profile of your portfolio.
Just for fun, let's say we do take that 5% of my portfolio and I do put it in. Let's look at that 5%. What's in there? Do I just stay with gold and stay Bitcoin, or?
So there are a couple crypto index funds that's an easy route that have just come out. Coinbase has one coming out, and then there's a couple of others as well. And then I would start with Bitcoin and Ether. Those are just very good bets, 50-50. One of them will be successful.
Yeah, yeah.
In my view.
Maybe both.
I think so.
And then if you fork, do you also... So there's a thing called forking, audience, where like someone will say, we now disagree on what Bitcoin is, and then something like Bitcoin Cash breaks off. Do you reap a benefit from that forking?
Of course. So when a coin forks, in theory, especially if you hold your crypto, it's not being held on a custodian service like Coinbase, you can go and receive those coins, those new coins that are created by the fork. I never did it with like Bitcoin Gold, but I definitely did it with Bitcoin Cash, and I sold that Bitcoin Cash, and
he's got a big smile on his face.
I know.
Well, it's cool because in theory it's free money. It's not always true. Sometimes when coins fork, it devalues the original coin, but in the case of Bitcoin Cash, it was just pretty much a free dividend on my original Bitcoin investment.
This has been a very short time span for you that you've really kind of skyrocketed to this level. I mean, what has that journey been like for you on a personal level?
It's somewhat surreal, but at the same time, it so much fulfills the ambitions I've had for myself since I was a child. I always knew I wanted to kind of change the world at scale. And when I fell out of love with politics, I didn't really know what to do. But coming across Bitcoin, especially in the early days of pursuing it, like when I dropped out of college, it felt like this very distant possibility that we could actually create change with blockchain tech. Back then, it looked very unlikely that Bitcoin or blockchain technology would be successful. But I knew that if I didn't drop out of school and pursue what I was doing, and blockchain and Bitcoin were successful, then I would regret it for the rest of my life. And so when I dropped out of school, that was my thesis. And it was an uphill battle for a very long time. It was totally unclear whether blockchain technology would be successful until really late 2016, where the adoption got to the point that there was clearly no going back, where banks, governments were experimenting with the technology, and we knew it was going to be deployed in one form or another. And then, of course, you had the massive boom in all crypto assets last year and early this year. And it's been fun, but it's more concerning than anything. I think there's so much ignorance in the market that, while it has enabled me to amass a small personal fortune, it's not really something that I see as a net positive for the industry. I'd rather see more sustainable and sensible growth in the market as opposed to some massive bubble. The market cap of all crypto assets went past $850 billion in 2017 at the end of the year. And that was just insane. Now we're back down to, I think, around $350 billion, which is still crazy, given how little this technology is actually in deployment. The difference between now and 2014 is that the use cases are tangible, the deployments are coming, and blockchain technology is becoming real. And that sense of validation is incredibly rewarding, but the financial gain is much less interesting to me.
Yeah, well, you did talk a little bit about wanting to change the world, and I think something that, as we learn about blockchain and things that I've learned as well, just the shifting of the balance structure is so exciting. Can you talk a little bit about how you see the cultural implications of how blockchain is going to impact us as a whole?
So blockchain technology is the greatest technological disintermediator that has ever been invented. Because what blockchains fundamentally enable is the removal of middlemen. In theory, if I know who my counterparty is in a transaction, I can quite simply validate whether that counterparty has what they claim they have, and send it and know that and send them money or compensation for what they're sending me, and receive it and knowing that the process went through. We don't need banks, governments, other intermediaries to the extent that we have needed historically, simply because crypto assets and blockchain technology allow you to be your own bank. They allow you to create your own governance structures. And that's truly revolutionary. The idea that we can remove the need for trusted parties in transactions of value, whether that's the deed to your home, the title to your car, the rights to your music, the sale of your real estate. All of that can really be made a much more sovereign process for individual owners of value, and allow the exchange of that value to happen much more frictionlessly. So it's incredibly exciting. The use cases for blockchain technology just grow each and every day. The commercial deployments are growing, and we know that this tech is here to stay. And so it's just figuring out where it is best applied, where you still have some degree of counterparty or third parties involved in any sort of exchange of value, but there's going to be a massive disintermediation across industries.
You're talking about, first off, I love the talk about disintermediation because there is efficiency in that automatically. But governments are classic intermediaries, right? And it's kind of funny because, and you as a political animal will appreciate this, as much as we loathe Donald Trump's existence, right? We hate Congress more. I mean, across the board, everybody wants like the approval is like 20%. Yet when it comes to like this kind of process, everybody trusts government. It's this weird duality where you're like, I don't trust the people with the checkbook, but I want their fingers in the money, intermediating things. As governments try to intermediate and keep up, is it even possible for them to, I don't know, let's say Ghana wants to go onto the blockchain with their national currency and they just want to forego the thing. Governments are going to try to control that. All the middlemen have to fight for their ground.
What's going to happen?
Yeah, at some point, this is the whole idea, right? It is decentralized. Like, you can try to intermediate, but it's not going to work. What are your thoughts on that?
In the long run, blockchains and crypto assets are an existential threat to anybody whose business model relies on serving as an intermediary. But in the short to medium term, it's much easier for such intermediaries to adapt and reappropriate the tech rather than be existentially threatened by it. This is why banks and the healthcare and real estate industry and governments are all adopting this tech today. It's because they realize that while long term this tech may threaten them, the short term they have the most to gain by, maybe cannibalizing parts of their businesses, but instead still being the reappropriators of this groundbreaking technology rather than the ones being disintermediated. And so that's the general trend that we see with this tech. It's less has to do with disintermediation than reappropriation. But long term, the threat is much more existential for them.
And the other thing I wanted to ask you about is in terms of a store of value. Because value is one of the things we talk about a lot, distributed ledger and all that, the proof, all those kind of things. But value is not just this chair as an asset in your house. Value can be time, it can be place, participation. All these things have value. What are some of the value assets that are out there that maybe we're not thinking about in terms of what can be exchanged on the crypto blockchain?
Sure. So a great example is in healthcare. If you think about patient data today, the only person that does not have access to a patient's healthcare data is the patient themselves.
Yes.
It is insane. When I go to my doctor and say I need my files, the X files sent to hospital or another healthcare provider, they say, sure, okay, sign this form, this release form, whatever. But then I have no idea whether they did it.
Right.
And then I have to spend my time on the phone, waiting across call lines, seeing whether it happened. The mismanagement that exists in the healthcare system, is insane. The cost of healthcare in the United States alone is just exponential. It's inexplicable. And it has to do with the opacity that exists across this industry. And with blockchain technology, in theory, what you can do is return patient data to the patient. Give them the access to control who has access to their data. Give them the ability to see who receives their data and when. And make sure and allows the patient to ensure that their data is going to the right people at the right time and have control over this information that inherently should belong to them. Another great example is music artists. Music artists today, for the most part, struggle. And they have no way to monetize any sort of future earnings. In theory, with tokenization, you can sell your true believers, your early fans, a right to future royalties, allowing you to bootstrap your music early on, similar to a startup raising money from a VC. I invest in startups that aren't making money today, or in fact are losing money, based off of the expectation of future revenue and future returns. in theory, you can do that for any sort of inventor, artist, creator, creating any sort of future value, and be able to make those sorts of bets on individuals beyond just, your classic tech entrepreneurs.
So when we go back to the disintermediation side, then, so you've got the record label, right? And they're incented to underreport sales. That's not possible on the blockchain because it's proven that these things have happened. And the other thing is as that record company gets bigger, who are they going to squeeze for more money every time, they have to have the bottom line improve? They're going to squeeze the artist and then the fans. It's to the point where you've bled those things dry. So on the crypto side, I can see where music really would. Like, yes, you need someone to help promote your things, but that's its own.
That's a totally different business.
Totally different business, right? In terms of creating music and creating revenue, you're making a straighter path between the fan and the artist.
Yeah, there are lots of use cases. I've got one friend that's building a decentralized SoundCloud right now because SoundCloud doesn't work for a whole lot of reasons.
Right.
I've got another portfolio company called STEM, which does real-time payments, eventually using the blockchain for artists to track every single stream that they have across YouTube and Spotify and Pandora, downloads on iTunes, and get paid in real time instead of arbitrarily by ASCAP once every few months.
And what about on the healthcare side? Did you have any examples of companies that are doing that? Doing what you
there are
mentioned?
more companies doing electronic healthcare records than I can count. Philips is doing trials. Most major healthcare companies are exploring this right now, but there's no one that I'd say totally stands out. Another one is genomic data, being able to own and sell your genomic data for specific research purposes and getting paid for it.
Yeah. What are the things that as a VC now? What are the kinds of companies that you're looking at investing in?
I like to invest in companies that may feel like a moonshot today, but if they're successful in 7 to 10 years, they will have demonstrably made the world better in a very big way. And so we're looking for game changers, whether it's in the supply chain space, healthcare, in real estate, governance, identity. The use cases for this tech are so expansive, but finding truly instrumental, world-changing technologies, ones that are deeply ambitious but also grounded in reality, that's our goal. Is to find companies like that. It's the guys that are gonna create value, but value for ExxonMobil supply chain don't interest me, or decentralized casino. It just is not the sort of investment that we'd like to make. It's about thinking big and thinking about how do we go about investing in companies that are going to change the world at scale.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's one of the things I've loved about being in the space as well. I'm working with a client right now that's looking to reverse climate change, so through carbon removal and creating a marketplace on the blockchain. So they're pretty cool. Nori is their name. I guess what has been something that has surprised you along the way in this journey that you've taken from dropping out of college to where you are today, investing in world-changing companies?
It just always pays to be contrarian. You get told that, but very few people actually do that. I've been told so many times how lucky I am. And the fact is that I don't really think it's luck. I had the same information everybody else had about Bitcoin. I learned about crypto. I learned about Ethereum very early on. But the difference between me and most people was that I was willing to kind of stake my time and my reputation making big bets on this technology that other people didn't believe in. So I had good information, but that was publicly available, and I was willing to take risk and seize opportunities that others were not. And I think that's just what luck is. It is having good information and knowing an opportunity when you see it. But I'm not inherently brilliant or talented or had any special skills to do this. I can't even write a line of code. It's really about the ability to just identify good opportunities, and that is such an understated skill in any sort of frontier technology. It's just being in the right place at the right time and really seizing the moment.
Yeah, that's great advice. That would be great advice to your younger self, but you're already young, so.
Yeah, what do you do? Like, so obviously you're committed to this and you've been doing this for a while, but where are you in 20 years? I mean, you've done so much already.
I mean, that would be a good time to revisit the notion of a political career, depending where America is at that point, of focusing more on philanthropy. I founded 2 nonprofits, both of which I remain on the board of. But,
and what are the names of those nonprofits?
So that's the Blockchain Education Network, which I just founded. Another's called Unsung, and it's kind of like decentralizing feeding the homeless.
Really?
It's like Uber for feeding the homeless is a better way of putting it. It's a very cool concept that we still need to get launched. But
oh wow, very cool,
very exciting platform, and I can see myself doing that much more full time in the future. But to me, angel investing and startup investing is my favorite form of philanthropy. Investing in startups allows you to impact the lives, in theory, of billions of people. Because for-profit entities tend to be able to scale much faster and more efficiently than any sort of nonprofit organization. So I love nonprofits. Startup investing is something that I imagine I'll do for most of my life. But whether I'll be a venture capitalist per se is totally ambiguous.
Are there a lot of nonprofits that are moving towards the blockchain?
I think all nonprofits, or many nonprofits, are looking at this technology in a real way, looking at least in accepting crypto, looking how they can integrate blockchain technology into their business models. Figuring out how to do that in a way that is game theoretically and economically viable can be difficult beyond just accepting crypto as a donation form. But it's something that many nonprofits I've come across are absolutely doing.
It could create some levels of transparency for their funders as well, right? Just
100%.
Knowing where the money is going, right?
One of the big problems today is that cryptocurrencies are volatile, but with the introduction of stable coins, which are kind of these either algorithmic or US dollar tethered cryptocurrency that maintain parity to the dollar, you could definitely see blockchains being deployed for nonprofit financing and donations, because you do have a level of accountability that does not exist in nonprofits today, where you can actually see where your money is going.
Right.
And that is one of the huge promises, not just in nonprofits, but in corporations and in government.
Right.
Because we have a lack of accountability today.
One of the companies that we're partnered with in my other show, the Break It Down show, is called Charity on Top. And they're looking at the blockchain space by saying, you can always add a little charity on, like in terms of a smart contract even. You can say every time I spend this amount of money, there's going to also be a percentage of my money that shoots off and goes over to Charity on Top, which is a warehouse for all charities, all 1.3 million, whatever it is, 501c3s, whatever out there. So it's a constant flow to all, whatever charity you choose. Like Charity on Top can just be like a portal, and then automatically it goes into the blockchain education network. Like every time I spend money, 20 cents goes that way. And you just kind of get a constant flow instead of having to have these big galas where you hire Kevin Spacey to come and talk. You instead have this just steady stream of 5 cents, 10 cents, $18, whatever it is.
Yeah, the acorns model.
Exactly, yeah. It's an acorn model. So you just layer charity on top of, you invest and you give constantly. And you don't have to even think about it. It's just done if you use a crypto kind of model is what they're going for.
Right.
Yeah, and I think the beauty of that is that it's in alignment with sort of the underlying theory behind blockchain, which is, everyone can participate, right? And it's that democratization of funding for these startup ventures and nonprofits.
Right. I mean, and what we'll see with the introduction of these new crypto economic or token economic models is the blurring of the lines between nonprofits and for-profits, where you can actually create these profit-driven incentive models for really good philanthropic work, which is kind of the ideal world. Because what you want is to create models that enable, charity and philanthropy to be done not out of altruism, but out of a profit motive. Because that's the greatest incentive for anybody to do anything. If you can make money while doing good work for the world, that's the ideal scenario. And thus, I think tokenomics and the rise of this crypto economy can really enable that, where altruism is unnecessary, and, by the way, is totally unproven in social psychology, and thus can be removed and replaced with actual financial incentives to do good.
Yeah, absolutely.
What coins, in terms of ideas or specific coins, excite you? You're like, I just don't know where they're going and what if it's going to ever work, but goddamn, I love this idea.
Sure. So there's some very interesting ones. I mean, speaking of like basic altruism, like there's coins like Cure Coin and Grid Coin, which use the mining process to actually do computation for like cancer research.
Okay.
But reward miners with coins. And now there are all sorts of issues with these systems, but in theory could be used to actually help deal with the extensive computation that's required to solve many of the problems that exist in the life sciences today. Now, there's something like Filecoin, which in theory can replace cloud storage with a distributed, much more secure global system of file storage online. That's incredibly exciting to me. And the whole concept of decentralized applications like Augur, these applications that have no downtime, that are totally censorship resistant, could truly revolutionize industries. In theory, Augur could be the world's largest derivatives platform, which is the largest asset class in the world. And just the whole idea of these security tokens, these tokens that represent real world value, I think it will make the world a stock market, effectively, and creating a much more stable global macro economy as a result, because when everything can be tokenized, you don't have to just invest in the S&P 500 or public equities. You can invest in real estate, you can invest in land, you can invest in commodities, and all these things, or in derivatives and people, in ways, and royalties, and intellectual property, all these assets that historically have been limited to a very small class of investors and asset owners, and now can be opened up to the entire world. And you can see the stabilizing nature of that breadth of ownership. So I'd like to posit that this technology can really only make the world better unless, we allow the Federal Reserve and the Russian Central Bank and the People's Bank of China to just totally reappropriate this tech to create Orwellian big brother.
Is that even possible?
I mean,
the cat's out of the bag. Is that something that could potentially happen?
Oh, it's happening. I mean, it's happening in China. It's happening in Russia. The UK is looking at this. The Federal Reserve's looking at this and creating distributed ledger, not really blockchain, but distributed ledger based cryptocurrencies or centralized currencies. And this gives them, due to the auditability of the distributed ledger, this gives them total insight into how this money is being used in a way that's very worrying.
Yeah.
Cash is the closest thing that we have to Bitcoin today, and it is many central bankers' wet dream to totally remove cash from our societies. And when that happens, cryptocurrencies and crypto assets, blockchain-based ones, these publicly verifiable ones, will become so much more important.
Right. But, my thinking is that, there was already so much adoption of these decentralized ledgers and blockchain technology. I mean, do governments even stand a chance of coming in and inserting themselves and saying, no, this is this is a cryptocurrency you're going to use, like it or not?
In the next 100 years, the yuan, the yen, the euro, the pound, the dollar aren't going anywhere. And they will still be very likely more widely used than any crypto asset that exists today. And if they go and ban crypto assets, then that can really be a distinct possibility, or almost a guaranteed likelihood. But longer term, and in the rest of the world, you'll see the adoption of crypto assets occur much faster, especially in the developing world, especially in places like Zimbabwe and Venezuela that have dealt with hyperinflation, where the governments and central banks aren't trusted. The adoption of this tech will occur at a much faster rate than in the strongest economies. But longer term, this tech could definitely pose an extinction threat to fiat currencies, but that begs the question of what happens to the current nation state model, because without fiat currencies, the ability to print money and collect money, it becomes very difficult to maintain these massive kind of governments and armies that exist today. And that's a long road you can wind down.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it is interesting though, because when you look at what the demos, what the people control their power, if you're not funding all of these things, like maybe I agree with 80% of what the government does in a multi-trillion-dollar government. That's a lot of money that I don't agree with how it's being spent. And so that
when I get off this podcast, I'm going to go pay my taxes to the IRS, and the thought of it going to the Department of Defense and the Pentagon, where they're currently bombing Syria.
50% of our tax dollars goes to
the idea of it going to bombing children in developing countries is not appealing at all to me.
Yeah, it will give control back to the people if we can take it. If we can be responsible with that control, because we definitely struggle with that too. It's a big theoretical question and thought problem to have is what do you do when you defund or disintermediate the government out a lot of your stuff? How do they adapt and how do they react? And heck, does the military get even more big? Who knows?
My thesis here is that the internet is going to outlast the modern nation state. If you believe that, internet-based money is probably going to live longer than the current fiat government-issued form of money.
Yeah, if we don't bomb ourselves into extinction before that.
That is the short-term existential threat.
It is, it is. Well, Jeremy, this has been a fascinating conversation. Is there anything that you didn't get a chance to talk about that you wanted to mention?
No, this has been great.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Damn, I never got to ask about my crypto. I've got an Australian Mist level 3 crypto kitty, and I wanted to ask her how to get.
I know nothing about crypto kitties.
And why not crypto donkeys?
The crypto pets is coming out.
Yeah?
So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. So for people that are listening, where can they find you and hear more about what you're up to?
Twitter, just look up Jeremy Gardner, 2 words, and my handle, Disentrepreneur, will come up.
Disentrepreneur, I love it. Thank you so much, Jeremy.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.